Okay, so picture this, right? You're online and you find like this vintage record player. It looks amazing in the pictures, right? And the seller, they sound like they know what's up, good price. You're thinking, score, like I can already picture it, drink in hand, listening to some classic vinyl. But then it arrives, you plug it in, all excited, and nothing. Dead silence. Turns out I'm not alone in falling for these kind of traps.
It's amazing how often we fall for these mental shortcuts
Yeah.
and how often they totally backfire.
Yeah. And that's where this guy, Charlie Munger, comes in.
Oh, he's brilliant.
Yeah. So not just Warren Buffett's right-hand man, but like this guy Munger, he's a master at breaking down why we make these bad decisions. And he's got this whole framework for understanding these pitfalls, he calls them, psychological tendencies.
And what's so interesting is how Munger, he uses like psychology and history, business, even philosophy to kind of get at these tendencies. Not just about finance, it's about like human nature.
Right, exactly. He's like, forget the textbooks, let's look at real life. Like the story he tells about Federal Express, right? They had this whole problem with their night shift. Packages weren't getting sorted, deadlines missed. They tried everything, like pep talks, threats, nothing.
Can you imagine the frustration?
Oh, totally. So the solution. Turns out it was surprisingly simple.
They realized they were only paying the night shift when they clocked OUT, not for the hours they worked. So obviously everyone's just delaying their work, right?
Right.
They get paid more for doing less. Once they switch to paying by the hour, problem solved.
It's a classic case of incentives gone wrong. Makes you think, right? Like, how often are we responding to just the reward itself, not the bigger picture? Have you ever experienced that, by the way?
Oh, absolutely.
Like a bonus structure at work that, like, encourages cutting corners even if it ends up hurting the company in the long run.
Right. That's exactly the kind of perverse incentive Munger's talking about. Rewards that actually end up encouraging, like, bad behavior.
Yeah.
Yeah, he uses this example of Joe Wilson at Xerox.
Xerox, okay.
Yeah, so Wilson, he created this commission structure that rewarded salespeople just for moving product, basically. Didn't matter the quality, didn't matter customer satisfaction, just close the deal.
Short-sighted much. I bet that came back to bite them.
100%. Short term, yeah, profits were great, but long term, Xerox's, like, reputation, their market share, everything took a nosedive. Imagine you're the customer, right? Stuck with some, like, shoddy machine just because some salesperson needed to hit their numbers.
Ouch.
It's a cautionary tale. Like, the wrong incentives can lead to unethical behavior, and ultimately it hurts everyone involved.
Right. It makes you wonder, what are we incentivized to do in our own lives that might be leading to, like, unintended consequences?
That's a good question.
It's like that Mark Twain quote, right? If you pick up a starving dog and make him prosperous, he will not bite you. This is the principal difference between a dog and a man.
Right.
Speaking of self-interest and maybe unintended consequences, let's talk about the man with a hammer tendency. Have you ever felt like you have this one tool, this one skill, and suddenly every problem looks like a nail?
Oh, yeah. Munger loves that one.
Yeah.
He says we all have this tendency to over-rely on, like, our favorite tools and approaches, even when they're, not the best fit for the situation.
Totally.
And this can have huge consequences.
Yeah.
Especially in, like, medicine, where the stakes are really high.
He uses this example of a surgeon. This guy was, like, the best at this one procedure, but he became so focused on it that he started recommending it for everything, even for cases where it wasn't necessary.
Even harmful.
Right.
Yeah, and this isn't just about, like, one bad surgeon. This is something we see everywhere. Like, what about that investment advisor who's been using the same strategy for decades?
Even when the market's totally different.
Exactly. Or that manager who tries to motivate everybody with public praise, even though some people absolutely hate it.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
We can all fall into this trap.
So how do we avoid becoming the man with a hammer? I mean, it's good to have expertise, right?
Oh, for sure. But I think the key is to be aware of the limitations of those tools and to be open to new approaches.
Yeah.
It's about always learning, and questioning those assumptions we make. Be willing to admit when maybe a different tool is better for the job.
Yeah, it's like, what is it? To the man with only a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So how does this play out in the real world? Munger uses the case of Westinghouse as a prime example.
Yeah. Remember those perverse incentives?
Oh, right. Yeah.
Westinghouse is a perfect example of that. They were so focused on, like, growing their lending business, all they cared about was, just booking more loans.
Regardless of the risk.
Yeah, and it led to disaster. Massive losses, like a damaged reputation, almost brought the whole company down.
It makes you realize that you really do have to take a step back sometimes. question your hammers every now and then, whether it's like a favorite investment strategy, a management style, even just a way of thinking about things. You got to stay flexible, open-minded, willing to adapt.
Totally. I mean, Munger believed that just recognizing these tendencies is the first step to overcoming them.
So if clinging to our hammers is one trap, what about letting our emotions get the best of us? So Munger, he talks about these like twin forces. He calls them the liking, loving, and disliking, hating tendencies. It's like we've got these blinders on, right? We favor the things we like and we dismiss the stuff we don't, even when the facts don't line up.
It's a strong pull, yeah.
Yeah.
Munger gives this example from the Buffett family. So Warren Buffett's sister, Doris, she struggled financially for years,
Really?
even though Warren offered her investment advice.
Wait, seriously? Why wouldn't she take his advice? I mean, it's Warren Buffett.
Right. But as Munger puts it, she couldn't stand, like, the idea of her brother being right about something that important.
Oh, sibling rivalry.
Exactly. Just goes to show you how strong these tendencies are. They can even override our own best interests.
Wow. Have you ever noticed that in your own life at all? Like maybe you're like quicker to forgive a mistake if a friend makes it versus a coworker, even if it's like the exact same mistake.
Oh, totally.
Hmm.
And it's not just our personal lives either, right? These tendencies, they play out on a much bigger scale. Think about how these tendencies influence, like, politics. Negative political ads are so effective because they tap into our disliking, hating tendency.
You push out buttons.
Exactly. Munger even says that, like, after 9/11, after the World Trade Center, some people, their hatred towards the attackers, it was so strong that it distorted their ability to think clearly, to make rational decisions.
That's kind of a scary thought, like how strong those emotions can be. It's like our brains are wired to take these shortcuts, even if it means sacrificing, like accuracy.
Yeah. Which leads to another pair of tendencies. Munger talks about doubt avoidance and inconsistency avoidance. Our brains, they hate uncertainty. They hate inconsistency.
So if we're faced with something that challenges what we already believe, we're more likely to just like shut it out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Think about it back in the caveman days. You had to make quick decisions. You see a tiger in the bushes, you don't have time to debate, right?
Right.
But nowadays, this tendency to avoid doubt, to avoid inconsistency, it can lead to problems.
Especially when it comes to accepting new information or like changing our minds about something. Have you ever noticed how hard it is to convince someone that they're wrong? Like even when you've got all the evidence right there.
It's really hard. It's something Munger saw all the time in law.
Hmm.
Once someone forms a strong opinion about, say, a defendant, it's almost impossible to change their mind, even if there's overwhelming evidence that contradicts them.
It's like that saying, the mind, once stretched by a new idea, never returns to its original dimensions. But I mean, sometimes we need our minds to stretch, right?
Of course. One of the most, striking examples of this is the Milgram experiment.
Oh, right, yeah.
Participants were told to give these electric shocks to another person.
It's crazy how many people obeyed.
Right. Even when they thought they were inflicting serious pain.
Wild.
It shows you the power of obedience. This deep-seated need to avoid doubt and inconsistency, even when it goes against, our conscience.
So how do we, like, break free from that need for certainty, especially when the world is so complex and nuanced?
Munger talked a lot about intellectual humility, being willing to admit when we're wrong, seeking out different points of view, and staying open to new information, even if it makes us uncomfortable.
It's like being comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've talked about how our brains like those shortcuts, right? And
Mhm.
how our emotions can cloud our judgment and how that need for certainty can lead to these blind spots. But what about the power of the crowd?
That brings us to social proof. The idea that we look to others to guide our behavior, especially in new or unfamiliar situations. If everyone else is doing it, it must be okay, right?
Oh, I am so guilty of this one. Like, remember that time I bought those, like, ridiculous pants just because everyone else was wearing them? What was I thinking?
We've all been there. And Munger points out that this tendency, it can be really strong when we're missing information or if we're lacking experience. He uses the example of, oil company buying fads. One company makes this iffy acquisition, and suddenly everyone in the industry feels like they need to do the same thing.
It's like that herd mentality in the stock market, right?
Right.
Everyone chases the hot stock, even if they have no clue what the company actually does.
Yeah. And it can be dangerous. One of the saddest examples is that Kitty Genevieve's case,
Right.
that young woman who was murdered, and there were all these people who saw what happened. but no one did anything.
That's awful. I remember learning about that case. It's a classic example of the bystander effect, right?
Exactly. People just assumed someone else would call for help. So no one took responsibility.
Oh,
It's like the dark side of social proof, right? The tendency to follow the crowd, even when it means ignoring what we know is right.
it makes you think twice about, following the crowd. Maybe sometimes you got to be the one to speak up or to take action, even if it's not the easy thing to do. But on a lighter note, I'm guessing social proof isn't always a bad thing, is it?
Oh, definitely not. Social proof, it can be a good thing too.
Hmm.
It's how we kind of learn those social norms, right? Discover new music, find good restaurants.
That's true. I probably never would have tried that Ethiopian place last week if it weren't for all those good reviews.
Right.
Okay, but back to Munger for a sec. We've covered a lot. Incentives, the crowd. It's kind of overwhelming, don't you think? Like, are we just doomed to make bad decisions?
I know what you mean. But remember what we were saying earlier. It's not about being, like, perfectly rational.
It's more about awareness and, like, putting systems in place to fight back against those tendencies, right? So instead of just, like, impulse buying that record player, maybe I should have done a little more research.
Exactly. Or, like, if you're feeling that pressure to follow the crowd, just take a minute. Ask yourself, is this actually something I believe in? Or am I just doing it because everyone else is?
Right, right. It's like they say, the easy way is rarely the right way. Okay, so let's say we're on board with all this Munger stuff. We're aware of the tendencies. We're putting those safeguards in place. What's next?
Well, Munger, he was a big believer in lifelong learning, cultivating what he called a multidisciplinary approach. He believed that by studying, history, psychology, even like physics, we could,
Understand human behavior better.
exactly, and make better choices.
So it's not enough to just like read Munger. You got to read widely, be curious about everything.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to question things. One of Munger's most famous sayings is to invert, always invert.
What does that even mean?
So it means looking at a problem from all sides. Think about the opposite of what you believe. Challenge your own assumptions.
So like instead of just trying to be right, think about all the ways you could be wrong.
Exactly. It's a great way to uncover your blind spots.
This has been, wow, really eye-opening. I feel like I have a whole new set of tools to like navigate the world. It's like the psychological tendencies are everywhere, but now I'm ready for them.
That's the spirit. And hey, even Charlie Munger, all that knowledge, all that experience, he'd be the first to admit he fell for these biases sometimes.
He did.
Oh, yeah. We're all human, right? We're all going to make mistakes. The important thing is to learn from them and just keep trying to make better decisions.
So next time you find yourself reaching for that hammer, remember to, check the rest of your toolbox.
And maybe take a second to consider the other side of the argument.
Who knows? You might surprise yourself.
That's what Munger would have wanted. For us to be more thoughtful, more discerning, and ultimately more responsible in our decision-making.
And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive into Charlie Munger's psychology of human misjudgment. Thanks for joining us. And remember, this whole journey of self-discovery, it's a lifelong thing, right?
It never ends.
So keep exploring, keep learning, and we'll catch you next time.